Stable Diffusion 3 was finally released yesterday. And, well, the results are not great. So in this video, we're going to go over what happened and also the future of Stable Diffusion. Is it dying? Is this as good as it gets? Before we talk about the newest and latest Stable Diffusion 3, here's a quick summary on the history of Stable Diffusion. For almost 2 years, Stable Diffusion has been the biggest open source platform for generative AI. Its quality has, in most cases, surpassed other closed source image generation tools, like OpenAI's DALL-E and Midjourney. Plus, it can generate a ton of things that closed source models cannot do, for example, NSFW content. And because it's open source, the community has built a ton of really cool plugins on top of Stable Diffusion, which allows you to generate animations, or customize the pose of your subject, or all sorts of cool stuff. Now, the company behind Stable Diffusion is called Stability AI, and unfortunately, the past few months have been anything but stable for them. Their CEO Emad left Stability to work on a crypto project. And unsolicited advice to Emad, if you're watching this, work on Bitcoin, not shitcoin. Anyways, in addition to Emad leaving and their corporate restructuring, there were also reports that Stability was running out of cash to pay their cloud compute bills. Stability's infrastructure was spending close to $99 million a year, mainly on rented cloud GPUs from Amazon Web Services and Google's cloud platform. However, it was estimated that they only made $11 million in revenue in 2023. Near the end of 2023, Stability's financial situation had become dire, with only $4 million remaining in its bank accounts. So in a last-ditch effort, they plan to raise funds to bring in $500 million from Nvidia, Google, and Intel, but the plan fell apart. So the future seemed unstable for Stability. We weren't really sure if they would even have a Stable Diffusion 3 or when they would release it. We weren't sure if Stability would go under or even make enough revenue to break even. But earlier this year, we finally got news that Stable Diffusion 3 will be released on their developer platform API. This meant that you could use Stable Diffusion 3 via their API, which is of course paid, so that would generate some revenue for them, but the model was not open sourced yet, so users could not go in and fine-tune it and create LoRa's or extensions off of Stable Diffusion 3. And then from their preview images, it looks like Stable Diffusion 3 had some significant improvements over previous versions of Stable Diffusion. As you can see from these examples, it seems to generate text very well. Here are some additional examples. You can see that the text is perfect here. So here are some more examples. It seems to understand context very well. So here's a translucent pig. Inside is a smaller pig. This one, a massive alien spaceship shaped like a pretzel. It could generate this pretty well. A cheeseburger sits on top of a toilet that looks like a throne and stands in the middle of a royal chamber. So this is quite a complex prompt. You need a cheeseburger on top of a toilet, but the toilet has to look like a throne, and it was able to generate this quite well. Here's another tricky prompt. A kangaroo holding a beer, wearing ski goggles, and passionately singing silly songs. There's a lot of elements to this prompt. It has to hold this beer, it has to wear ski goggles, and it has to look like it's singing passionately. And you know, it does seem to follow this prompt very well. And from their research paper, it seems that Stable Diffusion 3 does outperform other image generators such as DALL-E 3, as well as Midjourney version 6, as well as previous versions of Stable Diffusion such as SDXL. So this chart is quite tricky to interpret, but basically the purple bar is a benchmark for visual aesthetics, the green one is a proxy for prompt following, so how well it follows the prompt. The yellow one is typography, so how well it can generate text. And then the y-axis is win rate. So if the bars exceed 50%, that means Stable Diffusion 3 beats this image generator over half the time. So you could see here they claim that it beats Stable Diffusion XL around like 70% of the time for these two metrics, and then 90% of the time for typography. And then for Midjourney, it beats it like 55% of the time for visual aesthetics, 60% of the time for prompt following, and then again, very impressive for typography. It beats Midjourney 90% of the time. Now, the problem was this release was only available through their developer platform API, so they have not made it open source yet. And using this API for Stable Diffusion 3 was really damn expensive. It was around 10 times the cost of SDXL when used through the same API. Now, there were a few possibilities on why this was the case. Maybe this Stable Diffusion 3 was a lot more computationally intensive, even though in the research paper they claim that the model is a lot more efficient. But a more likely explanation is that they're probably desperate for money, so they need to charge more upfront. And that's why instead of just releasing the weights right away, they first made it available through their API at a very expensive price, hoping that some users would at least pay some cash to use this before they made this open source. And this is actually a problem with open source. It's that you can't really sell the product because, well, you've made it open source. You can sell a service on top of the product, such as an API to access the product, but the product is free. The code is open to the public, so you won't actually be able to monetize that part. So that was the API. I don't think a lot of users actually used it when they announced this in April, because it was 10 times more expensive than SDXL, and we were all still waiting for the actual model to be open sourced so that we could download it and run it locally or do some fine-tuning to create some better models or LoRa's or extensions. But then finally, this week, they released the model of Stable Diffusion 3. So the weights are out now. We can now go in and download this and run it locally and fine-tune it and do whatever we want with it. One thing to note is that here it says the weights are now available under an open, non-commercial license and a low-cost creator license. So you can only use Stable Diffusion 3 for non-commercial purposes. If you plan to sell the images or just monetize your creative somehow, in theory, you need to pay Stability a certain fee. So once this was announced, a lot of users got their chance to download it and play around with it. But, well, here are the results. Just a warning though, the following images might be triggering. So, as you can see from the following images, Stable Diffusion 3 clearly has some serious difficulty understanding human anatomy. It's just shocking how the third generation of Stable Diffusion could be this bad when it comes to generating humans, which should be the easiest thing to generate. Here's another example. What a beautiful, stunning image of a young lady lying on the grass. I mean, this is just an absolute masterpiece. I cannot believe Stable Diffusion is able to achieve this level of quality and realism. And as you may know, all AI image generators are pretty bad at generating hands and fingers. So you'd think that Stable Diffusion 3, which is their most advanced and latest model, would solve this problem. Well, here are the results. You can see such beautiful and realistic human hands and fingers. I'm just really impressed by the level of realism it can generate. I mean, these hands and fingers just look absolutely perfect to me. I can't point out any flaws with this photo. Like, what a beautiful hand. And those nails are just absolutely stunning. This looks exactly like a human hand. In fact, Stable Diffusion is so good that someone even fine-tuned a LoRa for SDXL in case those users couldn't get access to Stable Diffusion 3. You can now have the awesome quality of Stable Diffusion 3 built right into XDXL. So here's what they say. Can't run Stable Diffusion 3 yet? Don't fret. You can have the SD3 experience right now on SDXL. And look at the beautiful images it can generate. Just absolutely mind-blowing. Here are some more examples. I am just absolutely speechless on how realistic, these hands and fingers and these toes are. And look at how realistic it's able to capture the anatomy of this beautiful lady. This is just perfect. Oh, and I didn't even mention the worst thing about Stable Diffusion 3 yet, which is you can't generate NSFW with this. Not that you would, of course. I mean, what a disgusting and sickening thing to do, generating NSFW photos with AI. Who on earth would do such a horrible thing? But anyways, the safety filters are very strict for SD3, so unfortunately, all your generated characters would likely be heavily clothed. And by the way, this was the same problem with Stable Diffusion 2 and why it was kind of a failure. People didn't want to use Stable Diffusion 2 and they jumped straight from Stable Diffusion 1.5 to SDXL because SD2 had a really heavy NSFW filter. Now, of course, not that you or I would ever use Stable Diffusion to generate NSFW images. I mean, what a disgusting and perverted idea. But it seems that people did not use SD2 because it could not generate NSFW. And it seems like the same trend is happening for SD3. So here's a comparison of a woman lying in the grass generated with SD 1.5 and then SDXL and then SD3. You can see SD 1.5 is pretty bad. I mean, this is one of their earliest models, so they are forgiven for this. And then SDXL was really good. You can see how realistic everything is. It follows the anatomy perfectly. The face was great. The grass is beautiful. And then we have SD3, which was just released this week. And oh my gosh, like it's clearly way worse than SDXL. I mean, is this a joke? How could this be so bad? Now, to be fair, SD3 does do well on some things. So it's quite good at understanding context. For example, these prompts have really tripped up previous versions of Stable Diffusion, as well as DALL-E and Midjourney. So here, blue sphere on the right, green cylinder on the left, it nailed that. Here's another tricky one. Blue sphere on the right with text SD3, green cylinder on the left with a red cube on the top, it nailed this one as well. And then here, blue sphere on the right with text SD3, green cylinder on the left with red cube on the top, orange background, dog face at the bottom. And it got this correct as well. So it is better at understanding context, I guess. That's because they did merge a transformer model with the diffusion model. So in theory, it should be way better at understanding context. However, as soon as you get it to generate a human, you're going to see some really awful deformities. Here he's missing a leg, his toes are completely messed up, his fingers look like toes. I mean, this is just a bloody mess. SD3 seems to do well at generating backgrounds. So here's an example. This looks very beautiful to me. I can't really point out any flaws with this. Here's another example. This looks perfect. Again, I can't point out any noticeable flaws with this. Everything looks really high quality, high definition. This looks very beautiful. Here's another example. This is not great. These rails here, this is also clearly an issue with previous versions of Stable Diffusion as well as other image generators. They cannot generate long objects very well. So things like bars, ropes, guitar strings, swords, lightsabers, any long object, it cannot generate very well. Thanks to our sponsor, Wondershare. Say goodbye to spending hours filming and editing videos because Wondershare Verbo is about to change the game. This is a powerful AI video maker that can turn text, photos, or existing videos into pro-looking videos in just minutes. No fancy camera or editing skills required. You can choose from over 300 lifelike avatars to be the face of your videos. Or if you want to use yourself, you can also create your own digital avatar and voice clone. Plus, you can use over 460 natural-sounding AI voices in 90 languages. And going multilingual is a piece of cake. With their AI video translator, you can easily translate and dub videos in many languages to expand your reach globally. But the features don't stop there. Verbo also has an AI scriptwriter that uses GPT to write your video scripts. Plus, there are plenty of AI video templates to help you create content even faster. Here are some ways creators are already using Verbo. You can create a social media channel around any topic like movies, travel, or horror stories, and then use Verbo to mass-produce content. You can also translate and dub videos into multiple languages using Verbo to exponentially grow your audience. Whatever your use case is, Verbo just makes it super easy for you to create videos. No more spending countless hours and tons of money on production. Try it for free via the link in the description below. So you can see with these wires and poles and rails here, these do not look realistic. Same with these ropes dangling from the ships. Something is just clearly off here. Here's another example. This looks perfect. I can't really point out any flaws with this. This example, again, not bad. It's really good at generating, natural environments. As long as there aren't any humans in the picture, then it looks beautiful. This one is really realistic and beautiful. This looks totally like a photo in the forest. I love this cinematic depth of field. Here's another one. Again, this is a very common issue with AI image generators. The lines on roads are awful, and clearly you can tell that this is AI generated, right? It's not good with lines and markings on a road. The cars do look okay, but there are noticeable flaws with this if you look closely. This one looks pretty good. So the fires here look very realistic. The buildings, the spaceship, the trees, this one is okay. This one also not bad. There are some clear flaws in the details of this building, but again, if you don't really look closely, it's hard to notice. The fire looks very realistic. This red moon also looks very realistic. Overall, this is not bad. And then signages and characters. Oh my goodness. I'm like really frustrated that, we've been having image generation for, 2 or 3 years. And this is a common problem. When it generates signs, these characters are just made up. They don't exist in real life. So how hard could it be to just train an AI on the actual look of these characters so it can generate real characters on these signs? Same with the license plates. Like you can tell this is clearly AI generated just from looking at the characters. And again, the lines on the road, they do not look like this in real life. I would say that the cars do look better than previous generations of Stable Diffusion, so that is an improvement. Here's another beautiful scene of the outdoors. I can't find any flaws with this. Again, it seems to do very well with images of nature, but anything that has to do with humans, whether it's buildings or signs or roads or cars or humans, there are still some very noticeable flaws. Now, SD3 also seems to do well with pixel art, so here are a few examples. There are a few errors here. First of all, this horse has an extra leg, and then these people here don't really conform to the pixelation of the overall image, so this one wasn't really good. This one is okay, I guess. Again, the legs here are just really weird. It seems to have a really hard time understanding the anatomy of humans and other animals. Alright, this one is a bit better. As long as it has a scene of nature and no humans or living things in it, then it seems to do better. And I would say the best thing is it's great at generating text. So you can see these characters are a lot more legible than previous image generators. Now, sometimes it still gets the text wrong, but on average, it's pretty good. As long as you don't mind these extra limbs and these missing fingers or extra fingers, then I think SD3 would be a great option for you. So in a nutshell, that's all we know about SD3 for now. It's important to note that these base models of Stable Diffusion had always been mediocre, so this includes Stable Diffusion 1.5 or 2 or SDXL. All these awesome, high-quality, high-fidelity images that you see on the internet or on Civitai, these were generated with custom checkpoints and LoRa's and extensions that other awesome and generous users have created. And this is the biggest advantage of being open source. You'll attract an entire community of people to build cool things on top of your base model. So now you have like plenty of different checkpoints and LoRa's for all sorts of different styles of images. We also have plenty of options for controlling the composition of your image or controlling the pose of your subject using ControlNet and various extensions. You can also generate short videos with Stable Diffusion using some other extensions that users have created. So yes, maybe this base model of Stable Diffusion sucks right now, but perhaps the open source community could create better checkpoints and LoRa's and other fine-tuned variations of Stable Diffusion 3 in the future, so that would make it much better than what we see right now. But this also brings me to another problem of not only Stable Diffusion, but all of AI that we know today. This includes LLMs like GPT and Claude and Llama, as well as Stable Diffusion. Each version or model is fixed in its performance. It's as good as it gets, and you can't improve a model further. So for example, GPT-3 cannot miraculously learn new things and improve itself to reach the intelligence of GPT-4. Similarly, Stable Diffusion 1 could not somehow improve itself and get to the level of SDXL. That's because the weights are fixed. Once it's done training by the parent company, whether it's Stability or OpenAI, that's it. That's the model. Now, the problem with this is that the open source community will build all these cool models on top of a particular version of Stable Diffusion. For example, this checkpoint only works with SDXL, and then some checkpoints only work with Stable Diffusion 1.5. Whenever a new version comes out, like Stable Diffusion 3, well, all these previous models that other users have generously created, they're not going to work with Stable Diffusion 3. So people need to once again build new models from scratch that are compatible with SD3. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way forward. If a lot of people have spent a ton of time generously creating all these fine-tuned models and extensions only for it to be made unusable when a new version of Stable Diffusion comes out, then, well, it's not a very sustainable model, and I don't think people would be motivated necessarily to continue building these fine-tuned checkpoints and LoRa's in the long term. And that brings us to the question, well, is Stable Diffusion dead? The short answer is no. I don't think that Stable Diffusion is just going to disappear. I mean, Stable Diffusion is an open source model, so even if Stability AI goes under, the Stable Diffusion model will live forever. However, I am starting to sense that Stable Diffusion is not getting better and better. We've kind of hit a plateau where it still can't generate complex poses, it still can't generate hands and fingers properly. I don't think the Stability team could come up with anything better in their next version of Stable Diffusion. It seems like we are seeing diminishing returns in terms of the quality of images we could generate with Stable Diffusion. So my prediction is that Stable Diffusion might be outcompeted by a better and more efficient architecture, whatever that might be. I don't think Stable Diffusion will still be the leading open source image generator in, let's say, the next 2 years. And I think meanwhile, people are still just going to use SDXL or even Stable Diffusion 1.5, and SD3 will just be ignored just like SD2 because of the heavy NSFW filters. So that's a summary of, Stable Diffusion 3 and what it can do and cannot do. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've played around with Stable Diffusion 3 already, let me know what you think of it so far. What have you generated and what have you noticed? Is it really that bad with generating humans and understanding anatomy? Is it really that bad with generating hands and fingers? I'd love to learn more about your experience with this so far. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, remember to like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content. Also, we built a site where you can find all the AI tools out there, as well as look for jobs in AI, machine learning, data science, and more. Check that out at ai-search.io. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.